everyone. My name is Maria Zuniga. I am this year's SPJ president. I would like to welcome all of you here to our third reality check of the semester with producer for CBS, Shannon Luibrand. We feel very excited and we're very grateful for you, Shannon, to be here with us tonight. She's going to share her thoughts on working in the journalism industry. So with that, during the lecture, we will have a period where we will do a live Twitter feed questions from you guys. So this is the time where you guys, if you guys have any questions for Shannon, you can ask it. You can do this by using our hashtag Hobart Reality Check. So I encourage you guys to please ask questions. One more thing, our goal from this event is for you guys who are going to be in the industry and as students, for you to take something away from this event that can help you. So I invite you to please listen, and I thank you for all of you that are here tonight.
All right, thank you, Maria. So welcome, everybody. I'm Nick Hirshon. I'm an assistant professor of communication here at William Patterson, and thank you for joining us for another installment of our Hobart Reality Check discussion series. The speaker series is sponsored by the Communication Department under the leadership of Dr. Rob Quick, and the student chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, for which I serve as advisor. Our goal is to hear from professional journalists who can offer insights into how the news business works and advice for student journalists. So I'm going to begin tonight, as I always do, with some questions for Shannon, but I want you as the audience to be involved, and as Maria just said, please ask questions via social media. You can start posting them right now, and we'll put them up at the end. So we invite you to tweet your questions for Shannon using hashtag Hobart Reality Check. Okay, hashtag Hobart Reality Check. And we'll put your questions on the screen in the second half of the discussions. So thanks to Tom for running our tech tonight, and thanks also to Michelle Sizz, who's helping with our social media. So now I'd like to introduce you to our guest. Shannon Luibrand is a producer at CBS This Morning, where she began as an associate producer nearly 2 years ago. CBS This Morning is delivered by Nora O'Donnell, Gail King, John Dickerson, and Bianca Goldrica. It's an Emmy Award-winning news program that has a daily audience of 3 million viewers and covers a mix of daily news, developing stories of national and global significance, and interviews with leading figures in politics, business, and entertainment. Prior to joining CBS This Morning, Shannon was a homepage editor and a staff writer at CBSNews.com. She began as a freelance writer at CBSNews.com a few weeks after graduating from Columbia Journalism School with her master's degree. Shannon also graduated from St. John's University in 2014, where she majored in journalism with a focus in broadcast and double minored in politics and government and international studies. During her senior year of college and in graduate school, she interned at CBS News in the investigative unit, and before that, she worked as a reporting intern at the Daily Gazette in Schenectady, New York. So please join me in welcoming Shannon Luibrand to William Patterson University.
Thank you.
So Shannon, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into your professional career and everything you've done at CBS, I'd like to discuss your academic background because we're obviously in an academic institution. So we first met when I was teaching a news writing class at St. John's University that you were in, and then you went on to pursue your master's from Columbia Journalism School, the only journalism school in the Ivy League and one of the oldest in the world, and we actually both followed that same path of going from St. John's undergrad to Columbia for grad school. So there's a debate in journalism that I'm sure a lot of our students are thinking about right now. Is grad school worth it? So can you just give us some insight into your opinion? Was grad school worth it for you?
Sure. So I always wanted a master's degree. It was something academically I wanted. Looking back, I'm not sure if I needed it to get where I was at CBS. I was interning, as Nick mentioned, my senior year, and then I interned a semester during graduate school as well. It was 2 years. And I think I was already at CBS. I got the job right upon graduating. So I'm not always sure if I needed my master's degree. It was something that I really wanted. I think all of you are probably in journalism or film now already. I didn't learn as much as I would have liked in graduate school because I learned a lot of it in undergrad. But I don't regret going to Columbia. Columbia's Columbia, and it's an amazing school. And I make great connections there. And I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have been promoted as soon as I was if I didn't go to Columbia. Maybe it makes my resume stand out a little more because I went to Columbia. I'm not sure. But for me, it's what I always wanted. And I think if I didn't do it, I may be in a position right now where I'm thinking I might go back and get my master's at Columbia. And when I was looking at journalism programs, I wanted either like NYU or Columbia. So immediately I was drawn to Columbia. And so I don't regret it, but I'm not sure I think it's a really personal decision. I would never say, oh, in order to get into journalism, you need to get your master's. Absolutely not. You can do really well, especially with a program like you guys have here. You can do really, really well in journalism and break into journalism without having to get a master's degree, but it's another asset, I think, to add.
Is your sense that most of the people at CBS do have a graduate degree in journalism or not?
I actually know very few people who do. Very few. I can think of one other person who we both know who has his master's from Columbia, and other than that, I really don't know anyone that has their master's degree.
Okay, so there's a path. And how about for undergrad? Are they mostly journalism majors from undergrad, do you think, or did they major in something else?
Yeah, it's a mix. I have a lot. Some majored in psychology, some majored in writing. Some went to schools that just didn't have journalism programs, so they did like poli-sci, government politics. It's a mix. I would say there's a lot more people who didn't major in journalism than I thought, but there's a ton that did too.
Okay. So we're going to talk about CBS This Morning extensively tonight, and later on I'll be showing you some clips of stories that Shannon produced, that she's worked on. You usually produce one story per day, I understand, usually breaking news, but sometimes feature stories. So keeping in mind we have lots of broadcast journalism students out there who don't really know much about the TV industry, but they're interested in breaking in. They could benefit from some insights about what a typical day. I know that there's really no typical day, but what normally do you do in your duties at CBS? And if you could walk us through in as much detail as you can, when you arrive to when you leave, what are your interactions? What kind of stories are you working on? Just kind of what's that workflow? What should they expect when they graduate if they want to work in TV news?
So our show goes on the air at 7 a.m. and usually a story that I work on airs between 7 and 7:15. Sometimes it'll air at 7:30 and sometimes 8:15, but usually it's between 7 and 7:15. So that means I work overnights. Most people who work in morning TV work some sort of overnight, whether they come in at 3 a.m. or whether they come in at 10 p.m. like I do. So I sleep during the day. In fact, I slept about 3 hours today before I came here, so I'm a little foggy. So I sleep during the day. I sleep from noon to 8 p.m. and then I get up and I'm at work by 10 p.m. And by the time I get to work, I usually know what my story is, and I'll read on the way in on the subway. Second I wake up, I turn around, I have a work phone and my personal phone. I pick up my work phone, I look at my news notifications, and then I think, oh God, okay. Sometimes I know by looking at the notifications what I'm probably going to be working on, and then I immediately open our rundown. We use EMPS, so I open EMPS and see what my assignment is. My name will be in the rundown next to my assignment. And then I immediately start reading in right after my shower. I'm reading in, I'm watching, if Evening News did the story, I'm watching what Evening News, how they handled the story. I'm going through my emails, and by the time I get in, I have a good sense of what I need. I'm collecting video, I'm reaching out. We have a great booking team, so they will oftentimes book the interviews for me. Sometimes they're done by the time I get in, so I don't have to worry about it. Other times, the interviews are happening overnight, if it's a West Coast story especially, because it's still early over there. We'll interview people, and then I'm compiling all the video, I'm doing all of that, and then I'm writing a script. And then by like 3 a.m. I usually have a script if it's a good, fairly slow news night. 2 nights ago it was not, when this horrific shooting in California happened, so I started writing a script at 3 a.m. as opposed to started writing at 10 p.m. And then I take it right through air. I work with the correspondent in the morning. I work with taking in their tracks, whether it's remotely, they're calling into an edit bay and I'm taking in their tracks that way, or they're emailing their tracks. A lot of them will track on their phones now. And I'm right there until the story airs. I'm working with the editor, I'm sitting in an edit bay, cutting the video, updating the story. If there's things that are really fluid, I'm writing the anchor intro and working with everyone at CBS This Morning, working with my senior producer. And then I watch it air, and then I usually walk out the door after that.
So a few things I want to pick up on there. You were talking about this idea of almost being like always on, because I assume that even when you're not at work, like today, well, at least the more recent hours of today, you're still paying attention to what's going on in the news, because you can't just come in cold one day and not know what has been breaking over the last few hours. Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? Are you constantly on your phone monitoring news? Are you watching a lot of CBS throughout the day, even when you're not at work? Or?
I'm always on my phone, monitoring my phone. I get push notifications to my work phone from every news organization you can imagine, from Fox News to BuzzFeed, Washington Post, New York Times, all of them. I subscribe to all of them. And then I am always on Twitter following the news, on New York Times homepage, on BuzzFeed's homepage, just looking at what's out there. And when I get an assignment, let's say for instance, wildfires. The wildfires is what was really big tonight. I am reading every story out there that's imaginable, and I'm watching all of CBS's coverage of it. I'm watching our affiliates' coverage. We have an affiliate in almost every single city in America. And in the middle of nowhere, we have affiliates. We have owned and operated, and so I'm constantly keeping up on what they're doing. I'll follow their reporters on Twitter because they share their video with us. So I'm following their reporters. I'm reading up because you have to know every single thing about your story. You have to know, and you can leave out one detail, and NBC had that detail and you didn't, and it doesn't look good, especially if it was out there, if it was reportable. So you're constantly reading up, constantly reading in, always keeping up. And always trying to keep up with all the stories in general. I have one assignment a day, but I'm trying to always have a good idea of everything that's out there, because you never know, the next day I could come in and have a completely different assignment. Mm-hmm. They usually try to keep us on the same thing. But I could have a completely different assignment that I know nothing about and need to read in very quickly.
And before we went on air here, we were talking a little bit about the importance of being well-rounded, so that you're not only following breaking news, national breaking news, but maybe following a little bit of local news and politics and fashion and sports and other topics that maybe aren't always in your interest area, but you never know when sports is going to intersect, for example, with breaking news, right? Mm-hmm. So are you aware of those sorts of things too?
All the time. I don't prefer to work on political stories either, but I have to be up to date on politics, because sometimes normal crimes, politics somehow ends up intertwining with the crime. Same with sports. We talked a little bit about kneeling during the national anthem, and I worked on some of those stories, and that has a politics element to it. So you have to keep up to date on everything. You just never know.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you were also talking about, obviously, your unusual kind of hours that you're working at CBS. I'm sure that's something that a lot of our students would like to know about. What should you expect when you're working? So that's one of the sacrifices that you're kind of making there. I know your schedule might change with promotions. You're recently promoted from associate producer to a producer, but I know you mentioned some of this before. When do you typically arrive? How do you balance work with the rest of your life? Because for a lot of people here may be thinking, well, but I have relationships, I have other social obligations, there's things I'd like to do. Right. So how much does this consume your life versus how much do you make time for just sleep, but also relationships, anything else that's hobbies that's part of your life?
Sure. So I try to balance as best as I can. One little background thing. In my mind, and I know I have a lot of coworkers who do this too, I pretend when I go into work at 10 p.m. that I'm going into work at 10 a.m. It's just a way that I flip it in my brain. When I go to bed at noon, I pretend it's midnight. And I'm like, okay, it's midnight, I have to be up by 8 a.m., where I really have to be up by 8 p.m. It's just kind of a way that I trick my brain. And I know I've talked to many coworkers. There's a ton of us on the overnights. We have a full staff. I talk to them about how do you do it, and they do it the same way. And I have weekends off. I'm lucky. We're a Monday through Friday show, so I am lucky in that sense that I have weekends off. I told you a little bit about how on Fridays I usually stay up 24 hours, which is really unhealthy. I do not recommend doing that ever. I never pulled an all-nighter in college or graduate school, something I was very proud of, and now I'm just living overnights. But so I stay up 24 hours on Fridays, and then I try to go to bed. My social life on Fridays is shot. I try to go to bed around 9, 10 p.m., and so then I can have a normal Saturday. So I can go out on Saturday night, I can see friends. I'm in a long-term relationship. He's super supportive. If you're in a relationship and you want to be in this business, find someone who's really supportive and understands what your job is and what you're doing. You're gonna have to work holidays. Not all of them, thankfully. I usually get to pick between Thanksgiving and Christmas, which is great. I'm off a week at Christmas this year, which is highly unusual in journalism, so I'm really thankful and lucky for that. But you have to make time for your personal life. It's a demanding job. It's a stressful job. You're dealing with really difficult topics with shootings and some of the horrible crimes in the news, and you have to make time for your personal life. I read a book a week, which is really crazy. I just find that they're fiction, usually trashy murder mysteries. But I read almost a book a week, and that is one of the ways that I kind of balance my personal life too. I'm like, I'm gonna read, I go home, I read my book, and I fall asleep. So it's kind of my way of balancing my life too.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we're gonna start diving into some of the different stories you report on, because I think that we'll use each of these to talk about lessons that you can share with the students, or just experiences. But as Tom cues up this first for us, one of the more recent stories that you've worked on for CBS News was a limousine crash just last month in upstate New York that killed 20 people. A lot of you are probably familiar with it. It was the nation's worst transportation disaster in nearly a decade. So I'd like to watch a clip from some of that follow-up coverage that you helped produce in the days after the crash, and then we'll talk on the other side about what goes into putting together these sorts of scripts and reporting these stories, and anything else that you'd like to share from that.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll play that first.
We have new information about the terrible weekend accident west of Albany, New York. 20 people were killed when a limo hit 2 pedestrians and a parked SUV. Bianna Goladriga is at the scene in Schoharie, New York. Bianna, good morning.
Good morning, John. This quaint town of 3,000 people is still in mourning and in shock this morning following that crash. CBS News has confirmed that Prestige, the limo company involved in the crash, had 4 of its vehicles taken out of service after inspections over the last 24 months. Saturday's accident is raising other safety concerns for the limo industry. There has been a deadly limo accident every year in the U.S., at least since the year 2000. Those crashes are blamed for at least 68 deaths. Chris Van Cleef is in Washington showing us what many of these incidents have in common. Chris, good morning.
Good morning. We know adults say that only about 28% of them don't wear their seatbelt every time they're in the back seat. And in this limo, you don't even have that option. So even if you wanted to buckle up, there's no seatbelt back here. And that can be a big risk if this vehicle is full, because there's all of this kind of debris over here. There's no airbag over here in the event of an accident. We also know that passengers not wearing a seatbelt are 8 times more likely to die in a crash.
Oh my God.
These jarring dash camera videos show what happens when a passenger in the back doesn't wear a seatbelt. Seatbelt use, or the lack of it, may help investigators understand why so many people died in Saturday's New York limo crash. Research shows backseat passengers are less likely to buckle up. And while nearly every state requires front seat passengers to wear a seatbelt, 22 states do not have a similar law for those in the back. Nearly half of all traffic deaths last year were unbelted.
All of the occupants being belted means that it's safer for everyone.
Deborah Hersman runs the National Safety Council and is a former chair of the NTSB.
When you have the dynamics of people colliding against hard surfaces and against each other in a crash, the outcomes can be significant.
Oh my God.
In the 2014 limo crash that nearly killed comedian Tracy Morgan and left another man dead, the NTSB found none of the passengers were wearing seatbelts, which contributed to the severity of their injuries. Federal regulators have limited oversight authority of limos because most don't cross state lines, so the laws are left up to the cities and states. Following this 2015 limo crash on Long Island that killed 4, a special grand jury found limos with custom aftermarket modifications to accommodate more passengers can lack important safety features and urged New York's governor to establish a task force on limo safety. The report said if nothing changes, there is bound to be another tragedy.
We should note that this limousine is not the same as the one that was involved in the New York State crash. We don't know a whole lot about that limousine in particular. The National Limo Association did not respond to our requests for comment, but Hersman says she would like to see better clarity and consistency in the laws. She compared them to Frankenstein laws for Frankenstein vehicles that have been modified after they were originally built. She also says the record keeping on how common these accidents are needs to get better.
So just to start out, if you can tell us what was your involvement in a story like this? What information are you getting? How much of the script that the correspondent is reading is yours versus theirs in general?
So this story in particular, I worked on some of the reporting. I did a lot with the limo story investigations into the driver and into the company, especially in the early days. I think we like to do a lot of breakout stories like this to show people other instances where this happened. Chris talked a lot about the seatbelt. Chris is our transportation correspondent in DC. He's great, super smart, and he knows this stuff like the back of his hand. A little story that I could actually tell about the limo crash. In the days after, I don't know how closely you guys followed the crash, but there was a lot of speculation about the owner of the limo. I actually grew up about 25 minutes from this area. It just so happened I know Schoharie really well. And my dad's an attorney in Albany, the capital. And in 2001, my dad, a little backstory, had a accused terrorist. It was right after 9/11. He was accused of trying to sell weapons overseas to terror organizations, a man from Albany. You can look it up. It was a very famous case. He was convicted in 2004, I believe. But he was convicted by what helped convict him was a FBI informant. So the day that this story started percolating, we found out about this limo crash, we got information on the company, we got a name of the possible owner of the company. And so I'm from around here. I was like, I'm gonna send this name to my dad, just see if he happens to like know who this guy is, know anything about him. My dad responded with a few expletives, and my dad does not curse, and was just like, I know exactly who this guy is. He was the FBI informant who sent my client to prison in 2004, who set up my client selling the weapons overseas. So it kind of unraveled from there. I was able to get some reporting ahead of other people because we had this name, and we're like, this guy is an FBI informant. The owner of this limo company has sent dozens of people to prison. He's worked with the FBI closely. You know, this company had obviously some regulation problems. What was going on. It was just a really strange connection. So it unfolded from there, and I did a story just on him, on the owner of the company. We later found out that it was his son that was really running the day-to-day of the company. His son has been arrested since and charged with negligence, I believe, for the crash. The limo, they believe, had faulty brakes. And it's just an interesting connection. And if you're able to put those things together, and the reason that I was able to also get this guy's name is we learned the name of the limo company, and then I went on Pacer, which is the government service where you can find court records. I highly suggest, if you're in journalism, to get a Pacer account. I think in the last 6 months, CBS paid $30 for my account, and I searched at least like 100 court records. Whenever I work on a story, the first thing I do when I get a name is I go into Pacer and I plug them in. And I see what criminal history they have, what involvement they have in the court system, did they file for bankruptcy? So we got this guy's name, and I searched him, found out that he owned the limo company, and then I sent the court docs with his name to my dad. And that's kind of how it unraveled. From there, we were able to figure out who the owner of this company was.
So are you often setting up interviews? Like we see people who are on camera there. Are you in charge of that at all?
No, thankfully, we have a booking team, and they handle all of that. So if I'm working on a story and I need someone, let's say I'm working on this story with Chris and I need an expert to talk about limo safety, I would say to our booking team, hey, I need an expert can you find me one? And they would go ahead and they would find it. And then sometimes I would do the interview. Sometimes we'd send the correspondent to do the interview. Sometimes the interview's done during the day before I even get there. And they just say, we got this interview for you, and I watch it and pick out what I think is the best sound bites for our piece.
So sometimes you're doing phone interviews that might inform just part of the script, or sometimes you're also doing in-person, face-to-face interviews where you're off camera and
I'm usually not in the field, so I do like remote interviews. So I will be at my computer, I will have the interview on my TV, and I will, the person who I'm interviewing will have like an IFB, an earpiece in, and I will talk through my phone to them and ask them questions. If the correspondent's not there. If the correspondent is there, the correspondent will handle the interview, but if we can't get a correspondent there, we don't have a correspondent yet, I'll do it remotely because of our hours too. I don't really go into the field.
Okay, but it seems like you have a lot of technical tools, like you're using Pacer. Is that where that grand jury report that they're referencing came from?
Yep. Okay. I believe the grand jury report came from there. I can't remember. But Pacer brings so much information that can lead you down a rabbit hole, finding other things and making other connections. And it's a government service. You have to sign up. You'll get a document in the mail with your login information, and it's very cheap. It's like 10 cents a page or something like that when you look at a page, and it gives you access to an entire world. And besides Pacer, are there other things you would recommend? Are there other programs you tend to use or sites you visit that would be good for reporting? A lot of our bookers use like Nexus, but it's extremely expensive. I don't think it's really reasonable for a student. I think Pacer is the most reasonable. Just looking through social media, looking through, doing Google searches and just digging in on names, going to the last page of Google, seeing. In this case too, we found, I was able to find a meeting minutes from a town board meeting in Schoharie where neighbors were complaining about the owner of the limo company and how he was always parking his limos on their lawns and stuff, and just little details like that. He paints a picture of who the owner of the company was, what kind of person he was.
And that's as simple as a Google search.
Simple as a Google search and finding some meeting minutes where his name was referenced, yeah.
All right, so I want to move on to another story you covered, and I'm sorry the first few were kind of sad or tragic stories. We'll move on to more positive ones. But another story here that you covered was the sentencing of Larry Nassar, the convicted serial child molester who was the national team doctor for USA Gymnastics. And he was accused of molesting at least 250 girls and young women, including many well-known Olympic gymnasts dating as far back as 1992. So we'll play that clip, and then on the other side, we'll talk about some of the reporting, especially on a sensitive case or something that may awaken emotions in you as a producer. How do you balance all of that?
The president of Michigan State University is stepping down over the Larry Nassar sexual abuse scandal. The former Olympic doctor was sentenced to 40 to 175 years in prison yesterday. Nassar admits sexually abusing women and girls while working for Michigan State and USA Gymnastics.
Michigan State President Lou Simon was under growing pressure to resign. She said in a statement last night, "To the survivors, I can never say enough that I am so sorry that a trusted, renowned physician was really such an evil, evil person."
Under the front page headline, Courageous, this morning's Detroit Free Press lists every victim that gave an impact statement in court. More than 150 women and girls confronted Nassar before his sentencing. Dr. John LaPook has covered this story for more than a year. John, good morning.
Good morning, Nora. In 2016, Rachel Denhollander spoke to the Indy Star about Larry Nassar's abuse. In that article, she became the first Nassar victim to publicly disclose her identity. A prosecutor said yesterday the case would never have gotten to this point if it weren't for her.
Larry sought out and took pleasure in little girls and women being sexually injured and violated because he liked it.
The case against Larry Nassar began with Rachel Denhollander, and on Wednesday, it ended with her too.
How much is a little girl worth? How much is a young woman worth?
For Judge Rosemarie Aquilina,
it is my honor and privilege to sentence you.
Nassar's victims were worth up to 175 years in jail.
I've just signed your death warrant.
Just before sentencing, Nassar spoke directly to his victims.
An acceptable apology to all of you is impossible to write and convey.
But his apology did not sit well with Aquilina, who countered it by reading a letter Nassar gave her last week.
I was a good doctor. What I did in the state cases was medical, not sexual. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
Day after day, one by one, Nassar's victims confronted him in court. But many, like Sterling Reithman, also took on Michigan State University, USA Gymnastics, and the U.S. Olympic Committee.
Michigan State, where do you stand? USAG and the USOC, where do you stand?
Larry Nassar did not arise in isolation.
After sentencing, Denhollander also placed blame on the institution she believes helped protect Nassar.
We saw the worst sexual assault scandal in history unfold because a predator was left in power for decades. Despite warning signs, despite red flags, despite direct reports of assault.
The U.S. Olympic Committee says there will be an independent third-party investigation into itself and USA Gymnastics. It is calling on all current USA directors to resign. USAG applauded Nassar's sentence and said it supports an independent investigation.
So now we've seen examples of two stories that are obviously tragic, and unfortunately that's just a part of the news business no matter how you're involved, and this one has a lot of trauma and anger, unthinkable actions. So a lot of these stories can take an emotional toll on us as journalists because we start to think that maybe that's all the world is, right, or some of these negative things that are happening. So what are the challenges that you face with these kinds of stories, and how do you work through them?
I worked on this story for from the beginning. Dr. LaPook, way before I did, he did this story for 60 Minutes. And I covered it from the time Nassar was arrested until still recently. We still have stories on this with people at USA Gymnastics resigning, and recently someone from USA Gymnastics was arrested. Now they're talking about how USA Gymnastics may be shut down as the body for gymnastics, and the US Olympic Committee may take over. So it's been just months. I think a lot of my coworkers know me as the person that produced the Nassar stories. And I try not to take my work home with me. I think it's a thing you hear from lawyers and business people, and they're like, oh, I don't take my work home with me, and doctors, I don't take my work home with me. I really just try not to. And I try not to let it affect me emotionally. I try to disconnect from the stories that I work on. And I mean, there's so many good people in this world. There's so many good news stories. For every bad news story, there's a good news story too. We don't always hear as much about them, and I tend to produce a lot of crime stories and a lot of stories that some people may find upsetting. But if you're in this business, it's just kind of part of the business. You just kind of have to separate yourself from it. You can't, if I let every Nassar story I worked on take me down, I would have left a long time ago.
You also mentioned that you're continuing to follow the story, and one of the things I was impressed when we were preparing for this interview and I was looking at all the links that you sent. CBS has followed this very consistently, and one of the critiques of journalism as a whole, but particularly TV journalism, is that they don't follow up. They go for one big story, the hurricane happens, we go there, and then we never go back and interview the people, we never really follow up, we just move on. But CBS has stuck on this story and a few of the ones that you've showed me, so is that a conscious effort to make sure that you're involved, you see a story through?
I think so. I think so. I like to think so. Part of my job, every night we have a meeting at 10:30 p.m. and is updating the senior producers on what we feel is important stories. And every time there's a development in the Nassar case, if it wasn't already in the rundown, and it usually was already, but if there wasn't, I would say, hey, there's this development today. And a lot of times they would launch on the story. We want to stay up to date on things. The news cycle is so busy and there's so much going on, it's hard. I think it was 2 days ago, they said that some missing documents that one of the heads of USA Gymnastics was accused of hiding or destroying may have just been found in Indianapolis. And so I pitched that in our meeting. And I said there was a development, they think they may have found some of those missing documents. So part of it, as someone who's covering a story for a while, it's my job to keep up to date, see what the developments are, and make sure that everyone else knows what they are too.
So when you say you pitched it at the meeting, so how are you finding out about this stuff to begin with?
A lot of times I'm seeing it on Twitter. I'm seeing it. I follow a lot of the Michigan State and those the Detroit Free Press because of when I was covering this story. So I see that they'll tweet links to the local news, and I see the stories that way. Sometimes they're sent around over email. Someone at CBS will flag it. So there's various ways. Part of reading it, I'll read in for a story, but I'm also on Twitter looking, and a lot of times it will pop up.
So I think we've talked about it a little bit, but we were talking before, again, we went on air about how you communicate with other people within the office when a big story is breaking, and the importance of Slack, which we use here at the SBJ chapter. But what are the sorts of things? Are you constantly emailing? Is Slack, is there something else that is a good tool that you're all using to stay in touch?
Email, Slack are our main things, and just speaking in person. I mean, there's a lot of times I'll write up this whole email explaining something. I think I can just walk over to this person and tell them the same thing, and it will be so much faster and so much easier and more clear. So I think in person, especially in a newsroom environment, is really helpful, but email and Slack.
And you have a pretty open conversation with the correspondents, are you?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, they're great. And it's always an open communication, throwing ideas around, working with the senior producers. It's all a mix.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll move into a little bit more lighthearted stories. We'll get to a really good one in a minute, but we'll change the pace a little. One of these stories that you recommended we talk about is during the election season in the Democratic primary between the New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who just won re-election the other day, and his challenger was the former Sex and the City star Cynthia Nixon. And one of her major campaign issues, one of the platform issues she discussed was workplace temperatures. So there was some discussion of is a man at an advantage because man's body temperature is usually warmer, and became a kind of a debate around the country. So we'll play the coverage there, and it'll be a fun one to talk about how you got some information.
New York gubernatorial candidate and former Sex and the City star Cynthia Nixon put that fight in the headlines this week before last night's debate against Governor Andrew Cuomo. Nixon's team asked that the temperature in the hall be raised to 76 degrees, balmy. According to calling two cold work environments notoriously sexist. Nikki Batiste is here with what women, men, and science have to say about it. Nikki, good morning. We're matching.
Good morning. We are matching. This is a hot topic. Governor Cuomo's office told CBS News in a statement he has more important things to focus on than room temperature. But we found Cynthia Nixon is not alone in wanting a warmer room. The battle over the thermostat seems to be raging in offices across the country.
My opponent lives in the world of fiction. I live in the world of fact.
There was a chill in this debate hall Wednesday night.
Please stand
keep
for
moving the
20.
goalposts and have a whole different set of rules.
Not from the icy exchanges between actress turned gubernatorial candidate Cynthia Nixon and New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, but from the actual temperature. Cynthia Nixon's team says office temperatures are notoriously sexist. They requested this debate hall be warmed to 76 degrees, but it's only 69 in here, and I have got the goosebumps to prove it.
Why is it that time again women have to be the ones who are freezing cold at work?
Nixon's senior advisor Rebecca Katz said Governor Cuomo is known for preferring brisk temperatures, and Nixon's office unsuccessfully tried to raise the temp. Nixon's request heated social media Wednesday night, with women and men sharing their often polar opposite office temperature preferences.
I keep 2 jackets here.
At the Herald public relations firm in New York City, we also found an office divided by the thermostat.
You have summer on one side and winter on the other side.
While some men used desk fans and sported short sleeves, we found some women bundled up and using space heaters.
Women should know that they're not crazy. It's not all in their head.
CBS News medical contributor Dr. Tara Narula says there is a science behind why women feel colder.
It has to do with thermoregulation and metabolic rate and clothing differences.
A 2015 study found that most office temperatures are set using a 1960s formula that relies on the metabolic rate of an average man. Dr. Narula says men tend to be comfortable with a temperature in the low 70s and women in the mid to high 70s.
Finding a point in the middle where both men and women can be happy would be the ideal situation.
But for the New York politicians and at Herald PR, that may be easier said than done.
I think I'd be okay with high 60s, more or less, just so we can hit a kind of a medium
I'd say
there.
we can compromise at a low 73.
Yeah.
We have our own thermostat battles here at CBS News, so we decided to take a look at what the temperature really is here in our studio. And according to this, you guys, it's 73 degrees. I don't know, it feels colder than that.
That's nice. Actually, it usually is pretty cold here, but thank you, John. You always agree when Gail and I say it's too cold that we should turn up the heat, so we appreciate that.
Well, thank you for noticing.
Yes, and nobody in the control room has ever argued with us either.
I feel like I'm warmed by the glow of original reporting.
Oh, I love that. I'm always in a fleece and a blanket when I'm not on set, always here.
I prefer a fur stole. Just wrap it around me.
I do think Governor Cuomo has to be careful about how he responds to that by saying, I have more important things to do than talk about office temperature. It can come off as very dismissive. You have to work with other people, and other people have different feelings, and you have to always take those into account.
That's right.
And if you're freezing, you can't perform at your best. So,
yeah. Thank you, Nikki.
Okay, solved that. Thanks, Nikki.
I feel I have to ask her. You're cold right now. But you were talking about, this being one of the more fun stories. So what was your involvement in producing this story?
So I produced this story. I wrote the script for it and worked with Nikki throughout the night and through the morning. Someone else field produced, so they were with her when she shot that stand-up that was in the piece. But this was a fun one, I have to say. I was extremely biased on this story. I think most of the women in the newsroom were. We have this own debate at work, as everyone probably has been involved in a similar debate. So, but it was fun. It's really nice sometimes to take a break and just write really cheesy lines and add in little puns. And it was just a really fun, silly, but it had substance too. We had some facts and talked about why women often feel cold and men don't, and how office temperature is set. So we tried to make it serious too, but have a little fun with it.
Are you in charge of finding the PR firm that they went to?
Nope, so that was the bookers during the day. They found that, so when I came in, that was already all shot. But like I found that the study that was in there, I'm responsible for that kind of stuff.
Okay. One of the things I was thinking about there is, and maybe this is going a little bit too far, but there is concern sometimes in the journalism business of falling into politicians' hands too much. And so obviously when Cynthia Nixon raised this as an issue, she knew that it was going to get attention because there would be a whole half of the population that would have very, very strong opinion about it. And this has been on a national level, we've heard it a lot with Trump, is that he knows how to change the news cycle. He says one thing, and then we're not talking about the midterm election results anymore. We're starting to shift over to how he fired Attorney General Sessions and all of that. So is there ever decisions there about, well, certain, whether it's politicians or anybody else, someone who has a certain spin on a story and we don't want to just fall into their hands and do what they're leading us to?
Yeah, sure. There's conversations like that all the time. I think with this story, it was kind of like, yeah, maybe she probably did just say that so she gets some attention, but it's fun. It's something that we talk about. We're talking about, as soon as we heard her say that in the office, all the women were talking about it. Like, did you see what she said? It's so true. So it's like a fun story. So I think sometimes there's exceptions where you're like, you know what, we're gonna do it anyway.
Is some of that the nature of your show too, that you have this morning show that is supposed to be more kind of informal banter, and obviously we've seen some very heavy stuff that you've covered as well, but maybe is there a certain segment of the show, a certain time period where you try to get into more lighter discussions?
Lighter stuff, yeah, so this aired later in the show, so usually I do 7:15, but this aired like way later in the show. I think it was like 8:30. So it's later as the morning goes on, we do some lighter things, but we always really try to just be news. We want to provide people with mostly hard news so that they have that option in the morning because they may not have that option elsewhere. So that's what we, for the most part, try to do, but we get fun stories in there too.
So what is like the prime time period? Is there a certain segment of the newscast that you know this is the time when you have the heaviest viewership and you really try to promote whatever you think is the biggest story of the day for you?
I'm not really sure. I don't know. I don't pay attention to our ratings that much. I don't have to worry about it, thankfully. So I'm not really sure. I just kind of focus on whatever I'm working on that day.
Okay. Well, we have another one that is getting very light, but a very interesting story. So I don't want to give too much away about this one. We'll just have Tom play it, one more feature you covered, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
To find his birth parents ended up playing matchmaker. Martin Schmidt's biological mother and father had not spoken since high school. They put him up for adoption 36 years ago. Vladimir Duthier of our streaming network, CBSN, spoke with all three of them about their unique love story. Vlad, good morning.
Good morning. Martin Schmidt knew he was adopted, but it wasn't until he found out he was going to be a father that he decided to seek out his birth parents. The next 4 years would unfold just like a movie, one with a happy ending.
I'm Martin Schmidt. I'm their son.
This moment, captured on cell phone video, was more than 3 decades in the making. But the journey to get here, an altar under a tent in rural Wisconsin, was a journey of heartbreak, pain, but most of all, love.
The parents that adopted me have always been super supportive.
36-year-old Martin Schmidt was a newborn when he was adopted. His birth mother, Michelle Newman, was just 16 years old when she found out she was pregnant, several months after she and her high school boyfriend, Dave Lindgren, broke up.
I struggled with the decision. I just prayed adoption was the best choice.
Did you ever stop thinking about him?
Never. Never.
Michelle and Dave went their separate ways after Martin's adoption. Michelle moved to Hawaii. Dave stayed in Wisconsin and had several biological and stepchildren. In 2014, with a baby of his own on the way, Martin got in contact with his birth mom. She, in turn, reached out to Dave.
We talked until 2 o'clock that morning. So we were on the phone in probably 3 hours. And it just felt natural, like we just picked up from 17, 18 years old again. And then later in the month, she's like, well, why don't you come out to Hawaii?
Their connection and chemistry was instant.
When I got off the plane in Hawaii and walked down that airport stairs, I could just see that.
You felt it?
I felt it already, yes.
Did you, Michelle?
Yes.
What'd you feel?
A connection. Just like I saw him and I saw his smile and I was like, I remember that. I know this guy.
That trip led to dating. Eventually, Michelle moved back to Wisconsin, and the couple's relationship with each other and Martin blossomed. When you look at the man that he's become, the father that he is, what goes through your mind?
He's a great man. to watch him with his kids. He's just connects with them, pays attention to them, sees them. His parents did a great job.
I couldn't ask for anything better to find.
You two have found each other and fallen in love after finding me.
In early August, Dave and Michelle tied the knot, and Martin officiated.
You know, I think that the reason that this is working out so well is that these are really good people.
What have you learned from just this entire process of rediscovery?
Miracles do happen.
For me, it's just, never give up hope. Dreams can come true, and there's a lot of love out there in the world.
Martin told us the acceptance and support from his adoptive parents and his big sister made all the difference in reconnecting with his birth parents. Martin's adoptive and birth parents are both involved in the lives of his children, and I can tell you that there was there were tears in my eyes throughout the process of interviewing them because it's such a beautiful story.
And on so many levels.
Yes.
The fact that they got together, she didn't have any other children.
No.
And how great it is to find somebody that makes you feel how you felt when you were 17 and 18 years old. And it's that person.
It is that person. And, when you see their pictures of them in high school, you get the sense of how young they were. They were children. And so the reason that she gave up Martin for adoption is all the more clear.
And that child, Martin, brought it back together.
Indeed.
Vlad, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Vlad.
Thank you.
Great story.
So on the way over here today, we were talking about how Vladimir Duthier, the correspondent on that story, was another graduate of the Columbia Journalism School.
Yeah.
So it does, and he was a career changer. So journalism school did work out for him. But can you tell us again, what was your involvement on that kind of story?
So I wrote that script, but Vlad made it easy because he did such a great job at that interview. So the interview really, I watched it and I was like, this is a story. Like, it just makes it. So he made it really easy. Yeah, but I wrote the script.
And you're talking about how easy it is to work with someone like that. And how
he's great.
You develop a great
So great, yeah.
Well, and as we start transitioning, because we're going to start having questions, and again, you guys should be tweeting #HobartRealityCheck if you have any questions for Shannon. We'll put them up there. But about the importance of that relationship, because I suppose you could be a correspondent one day, and then who knows, people could switch and be producers, or it may not happen all the time. But certainly, I'm sure there's certain people, we don't need to name names, who you work with in the industry, and then they need your help later on, and so he's one who's really
a good one. Yeah, watch CBSN. He's on the digital network that CBS has, and he's just great.
And this is again showing that you do have sometimes these kind of heartwarming stories. So
not always death and destruction.
So you intentionally, we talk sometimes in class about a news mix and news balance. You are trying to seek out stories so it isn't just crime, mayhem, chaos. It is a little bit of this. Yeah. So what are you looking for in a story? What are the news elements, as I would ask my students, or what are the kind of characteristics of what makes a good CBS This Morning story?
One thing that someone told me when I first started at CBS This Morning that I found extremely helpful was what takes this story to the national level. And a lot of times that means we can have a local story, but let's say, I'm trying to think of an example, it's a flu death in Florida. Well, what is the national? How many people died of the flu this year nationally? How many people died last year compared? And so you want to bring it to national level, and a lot of times I find that's with statistics, national statistics, comparing them to local statistics. I just did the story on the lead in the water in Newark, New Jersey, and talking about Flint, comparing the amount of lead that's in the water in Newark to other cities, and looking at the demographics, looking at the poverty level. Those kind of statistics bring what, it's a national story, but bring what could be perceived as a national story to more of a local story to more of a national level.
So that's one suggestion you might give them if they're reporting, and this could go for print or broadcast, right? Absolutely. You're always looking for something that's happening here and you have access to that no one else does, but is there a broader message here? Is there a theme, maybe not of proximity, one of the news elements we talk about, closeness to the reader or the viewer, but there is some sort of novelty or an impact or just a emotional element to these stories, right?
Definitely. And what can our viewers take away from this story? Are they just watching a story that's about death and destruction and leaving and being like, oh, that was awful? Or are they leaving and I did the school bus story about the twins and their older sister who were hit and killed by the school bus last week. And we had a conversation about, daylight saving and kind of kids are waiting in the dark for buses, and how many times are people seeing a year, there was some organization that tracked how many times people were passing stopped buses when the stop sign was out. and which is a crime, and we're flying through the stop sign, and then sometimes kids were getting hit. How many times were people doing that a year? And it was like 86 times a day or something was the average that people fly through buses when they're stopped. And what's the solution? Do we put extended arms on buses so that the stop sign's longer? Do we, there's all different things. So a lot of times people are watching the story about these two twins and their older sister who were hit and killed by a bus. But what have some experts say can be done to fix problems of children getting hit by buses, waiting in the dark at the bus stop, kind of thing.
And so because of the nature of CBS This Morning, it is mostly you looking for national trends or some sort of story that's happening nationally that you're following. But have there been times where there's something that you've seen locally in your community or a friend of a friend or something like that, you hear about a story and then you pitch it and it's gotten on air?
I can't think of a specific one that's gotten there. I pitch things all the time from my hometown, because I just am always reading the local newspaper. And so I'm like, oh, there's a great story. I recently just pitched one. But there's a cult that was in upstate New York recently, Nexium. 2020 did a story on it. Dateline did a story on it. So I pitched that a lot. So I'm always looking at my hometown and seeing kind of what stories are coming from there. There's a little hometown bias, but I think everyone in the newsroom is from a different place. They have a hometown bias, so they're a lot of times pitching stories from where they're from, and a lot of times they get on air. I see them get on air a lot.
Yeah. Well, and that's what you bring to the newsroom. That's what they want you there for. Sure.
Yep.
Geographic diversity. So let's talk about a few things in the newsroom right before we get to the Twitter questions, because I want to make sure we get their questions in there. But you mentioned the makeup of the newsroom. What is the diversity of the newsroom? Because we've seen the trend in journalism education has been that there's a lot of women who go to take journalism classes, but then they don't end up actually going into the field of journalism, or if they are, they're more lower rung, they don't advance. They're not editors or producers. Obviously, you've succeeded there, but what is the makeup at CBS?
I don't know how it is elsewhere, but at CBS it's very diverse. Women, men, all different races, so all different backgrounds. So I guess I'm lucky in that sense, but we're a very, very diverse group.
Have you heard about those problems in newsrooms, or is it something that you were conscious about going into the industry? Did you make those decisions about, women's voice not being heard as much, or anything like that?
I think they're so conscious in our newsroom about making sure everyone's voice is heard. Women, men, people of color. So I'm really lucky, and I've always been at CBS since I interned there. I never left. So I haven't really faced that. Yeah, we're a very diverse group, I would say.
And how about the value of internships? Because we talked about some of the different things that you did before you got to CBS, and you worked in Schenectady, the newspaper there. You were also obviously involved with the student newspaper when you were at St. John's as an undergrad. But what sort of experiences do you suggest they get now that could help them get the sort of job that you have?
Intern. I applied to a million internships. I took forever to get an internship, because a lot of times they're like, well, you need experience, you need an internship before this one. And I'm like, well, I'm just trying to get an internship in the first place. So eventually the Daily Gazette in Schenectady, New York, which is near my hometown, hired me as a summer intern. It was the best experience of my life. I truly credit them with helping launch my career. I worked as a full-time reporting intern. So it was Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day, and they sent me out. It was the third day they sent me out, and they said, you're gonna just cover stories, you're gonna write stories, and thankfully I had a knack for news writing, so I had a little bit of an idea of what I was doing, and they had such wonderful reporters there who sat with me and were like, no, that's not how we do it, we should write it this way, this is how you should do it, gave me so much advice. Within a month, I was covering 2 events a day, writing 2 stories a day, having front page stories, as was the other intern. I wasn't unique in that, and it was just such a great experience. They paid me too. It's a tiny newspaper, and they were just wonderful. And so that internship, I then applied to. I really wanted to get into broadcast. I didn't want to be in print, but I had a lot of trouble finding a internship, and I applied everywhere. To internships, and finally I got a response from CBS, and interview went well, and then it kind of unfolded from there. And I had other options. Once I was at CBS, I got an interview at CNN, at Aaron Burnett's show. It went really well. They offered me a position. I had to make a really tough decision whether to stay at CBS or completely move over and start from scratch. And I had tons of conversations with people about it. What should I do? I had, at the time, really wanted to be at CNN. And I, in the end, decided to stay at CBS in the investigative unit, and it was the best, by far the best decision that I ever made.
But I guess staying in touch with journalism mentors is a good thing there.
Yep.
And it sounds like the internship you got, because I have this conversation with students a lot too, is that sometimes we see glamorous sounding internships because you're going to go to a big name news organization, but you really don't get to do a lot there. You may be more of a runner, getting coffee, photocopies, the classic kind of thing, as opposed to, it seems like your experience at Schenectady, where you're actually able to pitch stories, you get bylines, you're getting real experience.
Yeah, they treated me like I was a reporter. I'm still in contact with some of them. I follow like what they do, and they treated me like I was one of them. I would sometimes forget I was an intern. I worked an entire summer for them, and then I went back over my breaks, and I would work like 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And I stayed in contact with them. When I need a recommendation for CBS, I had like 3 people there that wrote me recommendations. So I think I got really, really lucky with that. I think those internships are rare. Especially now where you get to do so much, where you're not just like getting coffee. But if you can find something like that, look at your hometown newspaper, whether you want to go into TV or print, look at your hometown newspaper. A lot of them are paying now. It's going to be minimum wage. If you can deal with that for a summer, work another like part-time job, if you can get something like that, it can change your career.
And last thing before we go to their questions about, about internships is, you've probably seen a lot of interns now at CBS come through. So what are some of these, a question I ask almost all of our guests, what are some of the mistakes that you've seen interns make versus good interns who end up getting a job? What are they doing right? What can the model that they can follow?
Well, we have great interns. I think more from like when I was an intern, some things that you would see is people that didn't want to stay late, they didn't want to work long hours, they didn't want to work weird hours. They just they did like the bare minimum, or if they didn't have work, they didn't ask how they could help. I think if you're at an internship, and whether you're at a newspaper or at a place like CBS, go up to producers. When an intern comes up to me and says, I just hit my mic. When an intern, that's like horrifying in TV. When an intern comes up to me and says, is there anything that you need? Or a broadcast associate or someone, I'm like, oh my God, yes. Can you like log this interview for me? And it's so helpful. And you'll find that later on when I get an email that's like, hey, you had a really great story today from someone higher up, I'll immediately say, thanks, I couldn't have done it without so-and-so intern. They were like so helpful, they logged all my interviews for me today, or something like that. And then you get credit in that way too. But always be asking, is there anything I can help you with? Is there anything I can think of? We have a broadcast associate right now that is constantly asking me, is there anything I can help you with? And he's now, writing on his own and doing so many things because he's so helpful and so willing to go above and beyond and do things.
And I think that when people like that are going up for a job at CBS, or if they're looking for a letter of recommendation for someplace else, you now remember them distinctly and you have very vivid, good memories of them.
Absolutely. If they asked me tomorrow if I thought he should be promoted, not that anyone would ask me that, but I'd be like, absolutely. He's so good. He's a hustler.
Sure. Yeah. That's great. Well, I have some more stuff for you, but I want to go to our Twitter questions and see what some of the students have been tweeting. Again, hashtag Hobart Reality Check, so all of you guys can pull it up there. But all right, we'll just dive in. So we have Caroline Pierce here, who is one of our WPSBJ members. She says, what made you choose journalism as a career path?
That's a good question. My mom was like always watching news growing up. I was watching Dateline with my mom in like 5th grade, and I still watch Dateline like constantly. Monday morning when I get home from work, I still watch Dateline every Monday morning, whatever aired the past weekend. And I was watching 2020 growing up. My dad was an attorney, my mom was a teacher. So I felt like journalism, if you like combined what a journalist is, it's like a lawyer and a teacher like combined. And junior year of high school, I took a journalism class at my high school. I was really lucky. I was looking to get out of whatever like the more rigorous English class was. I was like, oh, I'm gonna take journalism. And then I was like, wait, this is really awesome. I love news. All I do is watch news. Didn't even really realize it. And then by senior year, I was like, I think I could go into journalism. Both my parents suggested it. They're like, have you thought about journalism? You're always watching the news. You're like obsessed with the news. Like, yeah, that's not a bad idea. And then by the time freshman year of college came around and I was a journalism major, I was just like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And now people will ask me a lot of times, like, what would you do if you weren't in journalism? I'm like, oh God, I do not know. Like, I really don't, because it's just all I've ever known.
How nice that your parents actually encourage you, because we hear so many stories of parents who are like, oh, there's no money in journalism, go into something else. But it's great that your parents would encourage your passion. And they saw that in you. So that's terrific. All right, we'll see what else we've got up there. So this is John Fiorino, who is the vice president of our WPSBJ chapter, saying, what are some of the everyday challenges that producers face? Was the title of producer your end goal from the beginning?
That's good too. I think when it's a very fluid situation as a producer, it can be really overwhelming. I think I briefly mentioned I did the California shooting on Wednesday night. And that started happening, 3 a.m. Eastern time. Our show goes live at 7. I was tasked with producing that lead story, and that was really stressful. And it's funny when breaking news happens in the newsroom. The newsroom's really quiet. You think people be running around all worked up. It's really quiet, and we're just all gotta get this work done. So I think one of the challenges is keeping up to date on what's happening, making sure we have it confirmed, making sure it's verified, making sure we're reaching out to the right people. We're scouring social media for videos. As for the producer, yeah, that was my goal ever since sophomore year of college. I was I want to be a producer, I want to be a producer, I want to be a producer. It came a little earlier, not to pat myself on the back, but it came a little earlier than I thought it would. And I'm thankful that I was at a place like CBS that allowed me to grow at CBS. And now I just don't really, people are well, what's next? I'm I don't know, because I really this is what I wanted. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there some time you think you want to move to being on camera, or that's completely off?
No. No.
That's never interested you?
No, I like the behind the scenes. I like the writing. I like what I'm doing. I like telling the stories in the way that I'm doing it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Let's see what else we've got up here. So Maria Zuniga, who's our president, who we saw at the start, what advice would you give to an aspiring news producer? Are there any specific skills or qualities that a news producer should have?
That's good too. What advice would I give? Be willing to work weird hours. Be willing to work holidays. Be willing to make sacrifices for your job. Don't turn down something because they want you to work, strange hours or overnights. And there's always opportunity to go dayside, to get more normal hours, but you have to put in the work early on. I think the skills that you need you're getting here, just from seeing your TV studio and seeing your control rooms, it far exceeds what I had. So I think that alone is just hone in on those skills in there, learn editing, be able to do anything when you go on an interview, be able to tell them I can shoot, I can edit, I can write. I don't have to edit. I learned how to, but I don't have to. I don't have to shoot, but I did learn how to, and those skills are really helpful. I have coworkers who do it all. So I think those skills are really helpful. What was the other part of the question? I don't know if I answered it.
I forget what the second half of the question was. But before we came in here for our discussion, Professor Al Clark, who's one of our faculty members here, showed Shannon around our TV studios, was kind enough to do that. And so you got a sense of what we have available, and you're saying it's pretty state-of-the-art compared to what you've seen or what you had in college, I guess?
Absolutely. It's really state-of-the-art. I was a broadcast concentration in undergrad, but I didn't see a control room until graduate school. Mm-hmm. I didn't use a camera, I didn't edit until graduate school, which is probably one of the reasons why I should have gone to graduate school. I made a comment that I didn't learn a lot, but I guess I did learn that. So I think your facilities are definitely state of the art. I was very impressed.
Well, thanks. Yeah. And we also actually just went as a WPSBJ chapter to the Columbia Journalism School, so we saw the control room there. We were all there a few weeks ago, standing around that facility.
I think your control rooms are twice the size, though, of what ours was. But
that's right.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right, so let's see what else we've got here. So Andrea asks, what's your advice for someone looking for an internship? What can you suggest for overcoming the fear of breaking into the industry?
Advice, apply everywhere. I sent out so many applications, I probably heard back from 3 places. Use your contacts, whether it's professors, friends who have been at places, whatever. If your friend's friend knows someone who works at CNN, try to get your resume in their hands. A lot of times these resumes just go in a pile and they're not looked at. Fear, I was scared too. It's scary. It's a difficult business. It's a tough business. It's intimidating to break into. But once you get that first internship, if you perform well in your internship, you're set. That's all you really need. So it's hard. It's easy to say don't be scared, but don't be scared. Yeah, you just got to go for it.
Yeah, great advice.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a lot of this. I want to make sure we can get to some of these. We had one of our own faculty members here, Dr. Matt Crick. What's your opinion on the White House use of alleged doctored video of CNN's Jim Acosta? So for those of you who may not know, there was the other day, Jim Acosta, who has had a contentious relationship with the president and a lot of, I guess, the Republican higher-ups, was asking a question at a press conference. The president didn't like it, and an intern from the White House was supposed to go over and take away Jim Acosta's mic. And it actually looked like just he was kind of trying to get away from her and continue to ask his question, but the White House made it look like he actually put his hand and like he was like kind of slamming her hand down, and then they revoked his press credential for the White House, saying the reason was because he had actually touched a woman inappropriately, which was a interesting comment to make from this White House.
Yeah.
So what was your opinion on that?
I, in general, try not to have too many opinions on the news and try to stay really neutral. I guess my opinion is I believe, like all of us, I hope, in this room, in a free press. I believe that you should be able to ask the president questions. I thought the fact that a video I think it was slowed down. It was shared from, I think the source was InfoWars. Yeah. It was slowed down to make it look like he hit her, when in reality it was like, I believe in a free press. I believe you should be able to ask the president whatever questions that you have in an appropriate manner, and I think Jim did.
At a time like this, even though we are obviously competitive and CNN and CBS and all these other places are competing for stories, but do you feel we're in a moment where some journalists kind of feel a camaraderie, a special sense of what we're doing is so important that we're not necessarily wanting to promote Jim Acosta's work if we're at CBS, but we still stand by him and the kind of reporting that a lot of people are trying to do when we're under attack by a lot of people, including the president, calling us the enemy of the people?
Yeah, I don't want to comment too much on CBS, how CBS feels and whether they support him. I think in general, I shared an article on Facebook about Jim Acosta, just shared it, and I had a bunch of comments on it. A lot of them were Trump supporting comments, and I just simply didn't. I had text messages from friends who commented on your post? I was I don't know. I'm not engaging. I'm not answering. I'm not liking any of the comments. I want nothing. I have no opinion. I don't want to be involved. So I always try to take that stand. And I think it's a good lesson too. In the Jim Acosta thing isn't so much political, but in general with politics, just keep your views off of social media. Keep them off of Facebook. Don't even like things. Don't share things. Jim Acosta's kind of the exception, but don't share articles, opinion articles. If you want to be in this business, I don't cover politics for the most part. During the midterms, I had to do a few stories, but for the most part, I don't. But it's really important, especially in this climate, that you don't have any opinion.
Yeah, and like you say, even sometimes as much as liking something shows up.
Yeah, people can look at your likes. They can see your likes on Twitter. They can see your likes on Instagram. It's easy. Don't like memes that are political. Don't like anything. Stay safe. Like your friends' dogs, and that's about it.
Right, and we've had different people come up here, and Andrea Grimes, when she was here from CBS, was talking about how much do you let people into your personal life on Twitter and all of that. But and it depends, I guess, if you're on-air talent, and some of it is you're more public anyway.
Definitely, yeah.
But no, good caution about social media and some things, especially even from your past, right? Things from high school or early college, and maybe you weren't thinking about being a journalist, not realizing now all of this is going to be out there for the world to see.
I have a funny story that I've told a few times. When I interviewed at the Schenectady Gazette for my internship, I was I was in college, and it was at a time where you tweeted everything about your life, everything that you were doing. And I tweeted off to an internship interview, right before this interview. Really stupid. And I was in the interview, and it was a 3-person interview, and one of them was a young guy. He was only a few years older than me. And he pulled up, he was so I saw that you tweeted that you were interviewing. Is it this interview that you were tweeting about? And I was oh my God. And immediately in there, I'm what else did I tweet? Oh my God, what else did I tweet? Because it was before you were really conscious of your tweets. So I always think about that. I could have tweeted off to this stupid interview, and then I probably wouldn't be at CBS either.
Right. Well, and that's something that I've warned a lot of our students about is First of all, you have to have a social media account. So just saying that you don't have Twitter or something in the news industry is like, how could you not? Yeah. It's just, this is part of, it's our bread and butter. And then if you try to lock your account, it just raises all of these suspicions about what are you trying to hide if you don't have your Twitter open. But what you say also is that I've had a lot of students say that they go on internship interviews and the first thing they do is they sometimes even pull up your Twitter feed in front of you. Yeah. So think very carefully right now, would you want me to pull up your Twitter feed on the screen and to see the last few things, and not your Finsta version of Twitter, you know, or whatever. You know, so you just remember that, and even like your fake accounts, your fake Instagram, Twitter, people can find it, right? We're journalists, we know how to find it, we can get past some of these things. So yeah, it's a very.
Another thing is whatever your handle is, make sure it's what you want when you get verified, because then you can't change it. And so I had like a handle from college. You'll think some people like tweeted at it, and then I like one day like ended up getting verified, and I'm like, wait, I didn't want that to be my handle. I want it to be like my name. And they're like, yeah, well, if you change it, you lose your verification. I was like, okay, so now I have this like stupid Shannon 18.
Although at least yours has your name in it. So Shannon 18. But yes, that's another thing that I've told you all in classes. Pick your Twitter handle as your name.
Yeah, just do your name.
Not some silly nickname or some sports team you follow or the year that we're in right now or
or the day of your birthday, the 18th, like.
Yeah, right, exactly. Or your birthday. Well, for security reasons, you shouldn't have your birthday, but also like you don't want to date yourself by having, you know, the year you were born in your Twitter handle, all those sorts of things.
Just make your name.
Just your name is straight up. All right, let's get back to, because I know there were a lot of good things I wanted to get to there. So we have Michelle, who's running our social media back there right now, actually, saying, if you're reporting on a story that personally affects you, how do you separate your emotions from the story? And we talked about that a little bit, I guess, with the limo crash or Larry Nassar. I'm sure any story you have some sort of emotional opinion, even the one about the workplace temperatures you had.
Well, that one I had a lot of, I had trouble separating myself from that one. I think this week there was the shooting in California they keep bringing up. I think for the first time as I was working on it, I was like watching an interview with a man who had survived with his stepson, and I found myself getting really emotional watching it. And that rarely happens to me. As I mentioned, I'm constantly watching crime shows and reading crime books and working on crime stories. But I was like, wow. And I had a moment where I stopped and was like, this is real life. These are, this is real people that we're dealing with. This is, tragic events. I'm watching this man's, one of the worst day of his life right now unfold. So sometimes it's hard. That personally affects me. There's not too many stories that personally affects me. Not too many stories that personally affect me. I don't know if that means as in emotionally or as in it's like legislation that was passed that could like personally affect me. But once again, I compartmentalize it and separate myself from it for the most part and just think, it's my job, it's what I'm here. Doctors are in giving surgery and sometimes they lose a patient on the table and they still have to go home and make dinner for their kids. So if I can watch something and I can deal with that and still go home and be okay.
Right, there's other mechanisms of dealing with it, and that's the importance of having a good life. Although we said, it's very important to have work, but you need to have stuff that you can go home to and have other activities and things.
And mental health is important, and I think we talk about this like a lot at CBS, and thankfully I'm at an organization that's really supportive. They offer, if employees are interested, we get 8 free therapy sessions a year that's completely separate from CBS. And they provide that for employees. They know that we're dealing with difficult things, so they're really supportive, and they talk a lot about mental health and making sure that you're, taking care of yourself. So it's always a good reminder when they bring it up to in meetings. I'm like, yep, that's why I go home and read books and like watch TV and just kind of decompress from the news cycle and try to separate yourself from it.
Great advice. All right, let's see if we can get some more in here, kind of quick hits. So we have Danae Gomez, who is one of our graduate assistants here. Hi, Shannon. How difficult was the changeover when you transitioned from web producer to producer?
That is a great question. It was horrible. And my TV experience was limited to Columbia, really. And I went from over to web. I got really lucky. I had a mentor in the investigative unit when I was an intern that put in a good word at CBS This Morning for me, and I was able to get the associate producer position that was open. CBS This Morning took a big risk on me because I was coming from web. I was writing web articles. I had nothing to do with video, didn't know how to write a script really beyond like school. And they took a huge risk, and it was such a big learning curve for me. There were terms that I hadn't heard since school and just basic things that I didn't know. But again, I had great bosses who really took the time and made sure that I got trained, and I had a female boss who's just unbelievable, and I was able to go to her a bunch of times and be like, I need help with this. Like, how do you do this? Am I doing this right? Is this correct? But it was a really tough transition, and my word of advice would be, it's easier said than done because I wasn't able to do it, is to get, if you want to be in TV, get in as soon as you can, and start from an entry-level position. Start as a broadcast associate, start as a news associate, start as an intern, and then move your way up. So I think it's a lot easier than going from a totally different career that's in news, but completely different over into TV. I found it really, really difficult. And it took me, I remember when I started, a coworker said, it's gonna take you about 3 months to learn everything and get accustomed. It was like more like 6 months for me. I think there was an extra few months because I didn't come up through the ranks at CBS This Morning. Thankfully, I've caught on by now, I hope. But yeah, that's tough. Get in as early as you can.
Yeah. Okay. Let's try to make sure we can get through a few more of these. We have Joelle Roman, who's part of our SBJ chapter. What's been your most memorable day since working for CBS This Morning?
Oh man,
rack your brain.
All the days like run into each other.
So many big news stories that have broken in the last few years that you've been part of, probably.
Yeah, I was there the night of the Las Vegas shooting, which was again like this California shooting where it was the middle of the night, and we saw some things on Twitter. We're like, is something happening? And obviously it ended up being the worst mass shooting in history. And I think we worked like 16 hours that day or something like that. So there's days like that stick out to me. Yeah, I spent a week in LA, which I think there was a question on there that I saw too, for whoever asked it. I spent a week in LA and that was really memorable. They sent me out to the bureau out there and I got to work on stories. So that was like an entire week that was really memorable. But no, all the days run together. I don't know. It's hard to pick one.
Yeah, I feel like after we go off air, you'll probably
I'll be like,
that's
that was the day. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, we have a lot of, any journalist, I guess, has so many different.
Yeah.
Okay. Try to get everybody in here at least once. So Alex Evans, who is the treasurer for our SBJ chapter, do you have a favorite or most memorable story? I guess that's similar to what we're just talking about, although, less a day, but is there a particular story or a certain person you dealt with or anything like that that's...
I run into people sometimes that I think is like interesting. I ran into James Comey in the hall. He's like so tall, as everyone knows, but he was sitting down and like he was like up to here, like just sitting down. He was
former
really tall.
FBI director.
Yeah, former FBI director James Comey. I saw Emma Stone today. I've seen Oprah. I saw Mike Pence. So you like run into people. I try not to. I actually usually try to go around the studio when I leave, so I don't run into people or accidentally walk behind the anchors. But yeah, that's always memorable to see people.
But now at this point, I guess it's become so part of the job, where it seems like you don't even relish that part of it so much. You're more just like you want to do your work and not have the celebrity interaction of, if you can call Mike Pence a celebrity. Okay. Let's see. We have Juliet, who we didn't get in there yet, the secretary of our chapter. Does your job allow for any creativity?
Definitely. Yeah, I get a lot of creative liberty with my scripts too. A lot of times they'll say to me, get creative with it. My boss always, get creative with it. If it's a fun story, so definitely. When you're writing, I think in general, whether it's print or TV, you can get creative. And that's why I love this field too, is because you can be creative and you can kind of think outside the box. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like in a lot of ways you have almost more involvement in the story sometimes than the correspondence. You're really doing so much of the initial reporting. And so that's good. All right, we just a few more people I want to make sure we get in there. Sarah, who is our publicity chair, says, what's one piece of advice you would give to all aspiring journalists? You've given a lot of advice so far, but is there anything particular you want to mention?
Don't get discouraged. Yeah, I did other interviews besides CBS, and they went really poorly. I've done interviews in the last year that went really poorly and didn't get the job. Don't get discouraged, just keep doing what you're doing. If you put your head down, you get your work done, you'll do great. And don't let people tell you that journalism is dying. That's like a big pet peeve of mine. Journalism's not dying. It changed and it's changing, but it's not dying. I mean, Jim Acosta, there you go, right there. Journalism's not dying. There's people, whether they're working in the White House or whether they're local reporters, that are doing really important, really good work. They're exposing corruption at every level imaginable, whether it's in USA Gymnastics or it's, in a political office, whatever it is, and it's really important work and it's not dying. It's false.
Preach. That's right.
That's fake news.
It's evolving, right?
It's evolving.
I feel like can I get an amen? All right, and then we had Megan, who is up here. We'll let Megan close it out. This is a nice one to kind of close out with, I think. What is the most rewarding experience of your job?
I think informing the public. I think it's hard for viewers or readers to keep up on the news, and I like that I can help contribute to them understanding the news and to knowing what's important that they should know before they're heading into their day. Sometimes giving them a story that they can talk about around their water cooler at work or in the break room. I like being able to inform people and being in like a more personal, like selfish way, being a part of history. You're witnessing history constantly when you're in journalism. You're a part of history. So I really like that.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Shannon. And we know that you have a very busy life, and we talked about the little sleep you're getting, and we cut into that a little bit today. So thank you so much for coming all the way out here and giving all this advice to us. So let's give Shannon a nice round of applause for coming out here.